The Mirror Universe, a Quantum Quest story. Welcome back to Quantum Quest, where we explore the most incredible possibilities hidden within the laws of physics. Today, we're traveling to a place that shouldn't exist. A region of space where the fundamental rules of matter itself are reversed. A world built from antimatter. This is the story of Inversus, the planet where everything is made of the universe's mirror image. In 2289, humanity's deep space exploration program detected something that defied every prediction. A solar system in the Andromeda sector, completely isolated by a massive void in space, surrounded by nothing but empty darkness for hundreds of light years in every direction. But this wasn't what made it remarkable. What made it remarkable was the spectroscopic signature. Every element in that solar system was emitting light in patterns that were inverted, backwards, wrong. The science team spent 3 months verifying the impossible conclusion. That solar system was made entirely of antimatter. To understand why this is extraordinary, you need to understand what antimatter is. For every particle in our universe, there exists an opposite particle with the same mass but opposite charge. An electron has a negative charge. Its antimatter counterpart, the positron, has a positive charge. A proton has a positive charge. An antiproton has a negative charge. When matter and antimatter meet, they annihilate each other in a burst of pure energy, not chemical energy like burning wood, not nuclear energy like splitting atoms. Pure conversion of mass into energy, according to Einstein's famous equation, E equals mc squared. 1 gram of antimatter meeting, 1 gram of matter releases the energy of a 40 megaton nuclear bomb. This is why antimatter is so rare in our universe. The Big Bang should have created equal amounts of matter and antimatter. But if it had, everything would have annihilated immediately, leaving nothing but energy. Instead, through some asymmetry we still don't fully understand, our universe ended up with slightly more matter than antimatter. The antimatter was destroyed, and the leftover matter became everything we see. Stars, planets, galaxies, us. All made of matter because antimatter lost the cosmic lottery 13.8 billion years ago. Except here. In this isolated pocket of space, an entire solar system made of antimatter had somehow survived. Dr. Yuki Tanaka led the expedition to investigate. She was a particle physicist who had spent her career studying antimatter in laboratory conditions, trapping individual antiparticles in magnetic fields for milliseconds before they collided with normal matter and vanished. The idea of an entire planet made of antimatter, stable and persistent, was beyond anything she'd imagined possible. The journey took 12 years. The ship, the Heisenberg, was specially designed with containment fields that prevented any part of the antimatter-matter barrier from being crossed accidentally. When they finally arrived at the edge of the system, they deployed long-range probes with antimatter sensors. What they discovered changed everything humanity thought it knew about physics. The system had 5 planets orbiting an antimatter star. The star was identical to a normal star in every way except the fundamental composition. It fused antihydrogen into antihelium, releasing the same light and heat a normal star would produce. The 3rd planet from the star showed all the signatures of being habitable: liquid, anti-water on the surface, an anti-oxygen atmosphere, complex anti-molecules that suggested biological activity. They named it Inversus, and they prepared to send down the first probe designed to enter an antimatter environment. The probe was revolutionary. It was made of antimatter, constructed in space using particle accelerators and magnetic assembly systems. Every atom of the probe was the mirror image of normal matter. When it entered Inversus's atmosphere, it didn't annihilate, it survived. And the data it sent back was staggering. Inversus was alive. Not just alive, it hosted a complex biosphere with forests, oceans, and weather patterns. And remarkably, it had intelligent life. The beings of Inversus called themselves the Antari. They were bipedal, roughly humanoid in structure, with sleek bodies covered in reflective skin that shimmered with colors that seemed to shift in impossible ways. Their biology was a perfect mirror of carbon-based life, built from anti-carbon, anti-hydrogen, anti-nitrogen, and antioxygen. Their DNA was a double helix of antimolecules carrying genetic information in exactly the same way human DNA did, just with all the particles reversed. Dr. Tanaka was the first to establish communication with the Antari through the antimatter probe's translation systems. The Antari leader, whose name translated roughly as reveries, had been aware of the ship's arrival for months. The Antari had developed advanced technology despite their isolation, and they had detected the matter-based vessel at the edge of their system. They had been waiting, curious but cautious, to see if these strange visitors made of opposite matter would attempt contact. The first conversation between Revaris and Dr. Tanaka was one of the most profound moments in human history. Two forms of intelligence made of opposite types of matter, separated by a fundamental barrier that meant they could never physically touch without mutual destruction, speaking to each other across the void. Revaris explained that the Antari had long theorized about the existence of matter-based life. Their scientists had detected matter-based galaxies in the distant universe and wondered if anyone like them existed on the other side of the cosmic mirror. But here's where the story becomes truly extraordinary. The Antari had made a discovery that human science had never achieved. They had learned to manipulate the matter-antimatter barrier. Not to cross it, that was still impossible without annihilation, but to create stable interfaces where matter and antimatter could coexist in controlled conditions without destroying each other. They called it the threshold field, a quantum boundary that kept the two types of matter separated by an infinitesimally thin gap, too small to measure but large enough to prevent contact. Dr. Tanaka was stunned. Humanity had dreamed of antimatter propulsion for centuries. The energy density of matter-antimatter annihilation made it the ultimate fuel source. A single kilogram of antimatter meeting a kilogram of matter could power a spacecraft to near light speed. But humanity had never been able to produce more than nanograms of antimatter, and storing it was nearly impossible. The Antari offered to share their threshold field technology, not as a gift, but as an exchange. They wanted something humanity had that they didn't: stories. The Antari had lived in isolation for their entire existence. They had never encountered another intelligent species. They had no myths, no legends, no tales of other worlds, because they believed they were alone. When they discovered humanity existed, made of opposite matter in a distant part of the universe, they became fascinated by one question. What stories do beings made of matter tell? What do you dream about? What do you fear? What do you hope for? Are the stories of antimatter beings and matter beings the same? Or does the fundamental nature of our particles create different narratives? Dr. Tanaka spent months sharing human stories, myths from every culture, ancient epics, modern films, scientific theories, philosophical debates, and something remarkable emerged. Despite being made of opposite matter, despite evolving in completely separate regions of the universe, despite having no shared history, the stories were eerily similar. The Antari had heroes who overcame impossible odds. They had tragedies about loss and sacrifice. They had comedies about misunderstanding and absurdity. They had love stories about connection despite separation. They had creation myths about how their world began. They had apocalypse legends about how it might end. Reveries explained something profound to Dr. Tanaka. The structure of matter might be reversed, but the structure of meaning is universal. Stories emerge not from the particles we're made of, but from the patterns those particles create when they organize into life and consciousness. A brain made of antimatter processes information in the same fundamental way as a brain made of matter, because information itself transcends the substrate it runs on. We are not our particles. We are the patterns those particles create. And patterns, Rivarez said, are the true universal language. This philosophical revelation had practical implications. If consciousness was substrate independent, if intelligence emerged from information patterns rather than specific types of matter, then it meant human and Antari minds were fundamentally compatible. They could understand each other not because they were similar physically, but because they were similar informationally. The patterns of thought, the structures of meaning, the architectures of understanding were the same regardless of whether the underlying hardware was made of matter or antimatter. The Antari proposed something audacious. Using their threshold field technology, they could create a meeting space, a physical location where matter-based humans and antimatter-based Antari could exist simultaneously without annihilation. The field would maintain a quantum barrier between them, invisible and imperceptible, but absolutely impermeable. They could stand in the same room, breathe the same air, well, air separated by the threshold, and see each other face to face for the first time. It took 2 years to build the threshold chamber, a structure assembled in space at the boundary between the matter and antimatter regions. Half of it was built with matter by human engineers, half with antimatter by Antari engineers. The threshold field ran down the center, creating a mirror line where the two halves met but never touched. When it was complete, Dr. Tanaka and Rivarez entered from their respective sides. They stood 3 feet apart, separated by an invisible quantum barrier, thinner than an atom but stronger than any physical wall. Dr. Tanaka reached out her hand. Rivarez reached out his. They pressed their palms toward each other, and in the space between them, something extraordinary happened. The threshold field glowed, not from annihilation, from something else, from the quantum uncertainty of 2 opposite particles existing in superposition, neither matter nor antimatter in that infinitesimal gap, but something undefined, something potential, something that existed in the space between existence and anti-existence. Rivarez spoke, his voice transmitted through the field. We are opposites. If we touched, we would both cease to exist. But in this space between us, in this threshold, we are also the same. 2 patterns of consciousness reaching toward each other across the ultimate divide. This is what connection means. Not the absence of barriers, but the willingness to reach across them. Dr. Tanaka felt tears streaming down her face. She had spent her life studying the fundamental particles of reality, learning the mathematical laws that govern existence. But standing here, separated from another conscious being by the most fundamental barrier in physics, she understood something equations could never capture. Intelligence wasn't about what you were made of. It was about what you reached for. The collaboration between humanity and the Antari transformed both civilizations. The Antari shared their threshold field technology, revolutionizing human energy production and space travel. Humanity shared their vast database of art, music, literature, and science accumulated across thousands of years of culture. But more than the technology or information, they shared something deeper. The profound recognition that consciousness, intelligence, and meaning transcend the physical substrate they emerge from. The Antari told a story that became famous on Earth. Long ago, before they developed science, their ancient philosophers debated whether they were real or if they might be living in some kind of inverted shadow reality. They called it the mirror paradox. What if, they wondered, there was another universe made of opposite particles, and that universe was the real one, and we are just the reflection? What if we are the antimatter to their matter, defined only by what we are not rather than what we are? When the Antari discovered that matter-based life actually existed, the question took on new meaning. They weren't the shadow, neither was humanity. Both were equally real, equally valid, equally fundamental. The universe wasn't made of matter with antimatter as the opposite. The universe was made of both. And the asymmetry that led to matter dominating most of space was an accident of cosmic history, not a statement of cosmic truth. In that isolated pocket of space where Inversus existed, antimatter had won the lottery instead. And life had emerged there just as richly, just as complexly, just as consciously as it had in the matter-dominated regions. This realization changed how humanity thought about existence itself. We had always assumed that our type of matter was the default, the normal, the real. Antimatter was the exotic exception, the strange mirror image that existed only in particle accelerators and cosmic rays. But meeting the Antari proved that was just perspective bias. From their point of view, they were made of matter, and we were made of antimatter. From a neutral perspective, both were just different configurations of the same underlying quantum fields. Neither was more real or more fundamental than the other. Dr. Tanaka published a paper that became one of the most influential scientific works of the century, The Symmetry of Consciousness: Why Information Transcends Substrate. In it, she argued that the most important discovery from the Antari encounter wasn't the threshold field technology or the existence of an antimatter biosphere. It was the proof that consciousness is pattern, not particle. That mind is process, not material. That intelligence is information, not implementation. This had profound implications for artificial intelligence, for theories of consciousness, for the search for extraterrestrial life. If the Antari could be conscious despite being made of opposite matter, then consciousness could emerge from any substrate capable of processing information in sufficiently complex patterns. Silicon-based computers, crystalline quantum systems, plasma structures in stars, maybe even space-time itself organizing into computational patterns. The universe might be far more alive, far more conscious, far more aware than humanity had ever imagined. The threshold chambers became meeting places for cultural exchange. Artists from both civilizations created works that existed half in matter and half in antimatter, separated by the quantum boundary but unified in meaning. Musicians composed symphonies where matter-based instruments and antimatter-based instruments played in harmony, their sounds transmitted across the threshold and mixed in the gap between existence types. Philosophers engaged in debates about the nature of reality, each bringing perspectives shaped by living in fundamentally opposite physical conditions. But the most profound exchanges happened between individuals. Friendships formed between matter-based humans and antimatter-based Antari, who would never be able to shake hands, never be able to embrace, never be able to exist in the same space without mutual annihilation. Yet these friendships were as real, as deep, as meaningful as any that had ever existed. Because friendship isn't physical contact. Friendship is recognition. The recognition of consciousness in another, the choice to value that consciousness, the commitment to connection despite barriers. One particular friendship captured the imagination of both worlds. Dr. Tanaka's daughter, Keiko, was 10 years old when the threshold chamber was first activated. She met a young Antari named Quiris, also 10 in Antari years, which were roughly equivalent to Earth years. They became inseparable, spending hours in the threshold chamber talking about their lives, their dreams, their worlds. They taught each other games. They shared stories. They laughed at jokes that often didn't translate but were funny anyway because of the shared absurdity of the mistranslation. Keiko once asked Quiris if it bothered him that they could never touch. Quiris thought about it for a long moment, his reflective skin shifting through colors that Keiko had learned to recognize as deep contemplation. Then he said something that made Keiko cry. "I don't feel separated from you. I feel connected to you in a way I'm not connected to anyone else. Because everyone else I can touch, I take for granted. But you and I, we chose this connection knowing we could never touch. That makes it more real, not less. We are friends not because it's easy, but because we decided it matters anyway. This story spread through both civilizations, becoming a symbol of what the matter-antimatter alliance represented. Not the erasure of differences, but the embracing of them. Not the overcoming of barriers, but the choosing of connection despite barriers. Not the creation of sameness, but the celebration of complementary opposites. The Antari shared another crucial piece of knowledge with humanity. They had discovered that their isolated antimatter pocket wasn't a cosmic accident. It was artificial. Billions of years ago, when the universe was young and matter and antimatter were still fighting for dominance, an ancient civilization, far more advanced than either humans or Antari, had recognized what was about to happen. They saw that the matter-antimatter asymmetry would lead to matter dominating the entire universe, and all antimatter would be destroyed except for brief flashes in high-energy cosmic events. This ancient civilization, whose name was lost to time, decided to preserve antimatter. They created isolated pockets of space, shielded by quantum fields that prevented matter from entering. They seeded these pockets with antimatter, allowing it to form stars, planets, and eventually life, just as matter did in the rest of the universe. They did this not because antimatter was better or because they were made of antimatter themselves. They did it to preserve symmetry, to ensure that both possibilities existed, to prevent the universe from becoming monotonous. The Antari call these ancient beings the preservers. And they left behind one more gift: coordinates. Locations of other antimatter pockets scattered throughout the universe, dozens of them, some with life, some without, some with civilizations even more advanced than the Antari. All of them waiting to be discovered, all of them proving that the universe was far stranger, far more diverse, far more deliberately designed than anyone had suspected. Humanity launched expeditions to these other antimatter pockets, finding new forms of life, new types of intelligence, new ways of organizing matter, well, antimatter, into conscious patterns. Each encounter reinforced the same lesson. Consciousness is universal. Intelligence transcends substrate, meaning emerges from pattern, not particle. The universe is fundamentally alive, fundamentally aware, fundamentally structured to generate mind from matter in all its forms. Dr. Tanaka, now elderly, stood in the threshold chamber one final time with her old friend Rivaris. They had spent decades collaborating, learning, growing together despite being made of opposite types of existence. Rivaris had aged too, his reflective skin less vibrant but somehow more beautiful for its weathering. They stood in their usual spots, 3 feet apart, separated by the quantum barrier that had defined their friendship. Dr. Tanaka spoke quietly. "I've spent my whole life studying particles, learning their properties, understanding their interactions. But meeting you taught me something I never would have learned from equations. The particles don't matter. We're not our atoms. We're not our molecules. We're the pattern, the information, the meaning. And that pattern can exist in matter or antimatter or anything else capable of organizing complexity." Rivaris's skin shifted to the color that meant deep affection, a color Tanaka had learned to recognize as his way of smiling. "You gave me something too. You gave me the understanding that being opposite doesn't mean being enemy, that difference doesn't mean separation, that two things can be inverse and still be connected. In mathematics, positive and negative numbers are opposites, but they're both needed to describe reality. We are like that. Matter and antimatter, opposite but complementary. Two halves of a complete universe." They pressed their hands toward each other one last time, and in the quantum gap between their palms, the threshold field glowed with that strange light that was neither matter nor antimatter, but something undefined, something potential, something that existed in the space between. And in that glow, in that gap, in that threshold, Dr. Tanaka understood the deepest truth of existence. Separation is an illusion. Connection is a choice. And consciousness wherever it emerges, whatever it's made of, is always reaching across the barriers toward other consciousness, always seeking to recognize itself in the other, always choosing meaning over isolation. The matter-antimatter alliance became the foundation for a new era of cosmic exploration and understanding. Humanity no longer searched for life that looked like human life or was made of the same materials as human life. They searched for pattern, for complexity, for information processing, regardless of substrate, and they found it everywhere, in ways they expected and in ways they never imagined. The universe revealed itself not as a place where one type of matter dominated, but as a vast tapestry of different possible configurations of existence, each one capable of generating consciousness, each one reaching out toward the others, each one proving that the fundamental nature of reality is not division but connection. Thanks for joining us on Quantum Quest. If this story changed how you think about consciousness, matter, or what it means to be real, leave a comment below. Do you think consciousness could exist in forms we haven't recognized yet? What would you say to an antimatter version of yourself if you could meet them across a quantum barrier? Hit that subscribe button for more explorations into the deepest mysteries of existence. Until next time, keep questioning. And remember, we are not our particles. We are the patterns those particles create. And patterns, like consciousness itself, transcend the material that carries them.